So one of the next skills that we're going to talk about, which can be really important within ourselves and within our families, especially right now, is radical acceptance. And before we get into radical acceptance, I'm going to talk a little bit about what exactly this means in the distress tolerance module. So in the distress tolerance module, we have two parts. The first part is crisis survival. These are some of the videos that you've already seen with skills such as TIP, self-soothe, and pros and cons. And so when we are in crisis survival, this is where we want to use these skills in the short term to get through crisis. Now, the second part of distress tolerance is what we call reality acceptance. And so these are the skills that are going to help us really accept our reality. Sometimes we might be in crisis survival and think that we need the skills to get us through that crisis, when what we might need to do is accept the moment fully and wholeheartedly. Other times, we might think that we have to accept our misery and accept our pain, and there are skills that can help get us through that moment and change that moment. And so both crisis survival and reality acceptance are, while different, very, very important. And so the first skill in reality acceptance that we talk about is radical acceptance. And this is one of my favorite skills, and I think that it is very, very important. So before we get into what exactly is radical acceptance, we want to talk about what pain and non-acceptance looks like when we are experiencing difficult events. And so one thing that I love to spend some time looking at and talking about is just this equation right here. Pain plus non-acceptance equals suffering, and pain plus acceptance equals pain. And this often throws people for a loop. They're like, what does that even mean? And so in DBT, what we talk about is that dialectic of we can experience painful events while working towards or living our life worth living. And so with that being said, life is painful. We experience painful events. We lose relationships that we love, people that we love. We go through really difficult moments, and that is painful. Throughout life, pain will be unavoidable. You will experience things in your lifetime that are painful. For example, for many of us, we can't see some of our family members right now. That is painful. For some of us, we have lost family members. That is painful. And when we choose to accept that pain that is inevitable, we can sit with that pain while also learning to accumulate positive emotions or work towards our life worth living. It is when we do not accept that pain, so that pain plus non-acceptance, that we begin to suffer. And there is actually a significant difference between pain and suffering. Like I said, pain are those moments that we experience daily and throughout our lifetime. And we are able to get through those moments when we are skillful. When we choose to not accept the painful parts of life, that is when we get stuck in misery. And that is really when we can experience intense emotions and feel like our life is not worth living. And so it really is important to distinguish the difference between the two. Pain we will have, yes, it is uncomfortable, it is not ideal, and sometimes we really don't want to be in that space. And when we learn to accept that pain, we can move towards our life worth living. And that is why radical acceptance is so important. So what is radical acceptance? What is this idea of acceptance being radical, right? It sounds to me like it's probably a pretty big thing, and it is. So radical acceptance is accepting all the way, fully, in our mind, our heart, and our body. We are accepting things with every part of our being. It is when we stop fighting our reality because it is not the way we want it to be, and we let go of bitterness. So many of us, I know me included, have been in moments in our life where we have tried to fight reality. This is not happening to me. I can't believe this is happening to me. This is not real. And think about the times when you were in that space and how painful and possibly miserable that was. So radical acceptance is when we make the choice to stop fighting that reality, even if it's not the way that we want it. And another important thing to remember is acceptance is not approval, right? When we have these difficult moments in our lives and we accept them, we are not saying, great, this is wonderful. I'm so glad this is happening, right? We are simply accepting that this is my reality right now. It does not mean that we are saying that it is okay, favorable, or a good thing. So what has to be accepted? What are the things in life that we do have to accept? Because radical acceptance is something that is important to use daily and oftentimes becomes a core skill that we need, especially in difficult moments, like right now when we're stuck in our homes. So we want to accept reality as it is. Facts about the past and the present are facts, even if you don't like them. Remember, we cannot control the past because those things have already happened, right? And we can't control the future because that hasn't happened yet, but we can choose to accept our past and make changes in our reality so that the future can be different. We want to also accept that there are limitations on the future for everyone, and those realistic ones need to be accepted. For example, if I just up and decided to end my therapist career and go to medical school, I might have to accept that that might not work out the way that I want it to, being my age and how much education and school I've already been through, and being that I've already built a very solid career. And so I might want to accept that going to medical school might not be a reality that's going to have, the outcome that I might want it to. We also want to accept that everything has a cause, including events and situations that cause you pain and suffering. We also want to accept that life can be worth living, even with painful events in it. This is one of my favorite parts about radical acceptance, because we, again, talk about that synthesis of painful events and a life worth living, and those things can exist simultaneously. And so we want to remember that if life had to be pain-free to be worth living, no one would have a life worth living.
So why do we accept reality? Because like Brooke said, it is a really hard thing to do at times, especially in something like this right now. The fact that we have to be in our houses and it's a beautiful spring day and we don't get to play in it, among other things. So why do we need to accept our reality? One point is that if we continue to reject our reality, that doesn't change it. By rejecting it and not engaging with it, it continues to be our reality. We are just not engaging with our reality anymore. And so that can keep us in a state of misery, because by rejecting something, it's not changing anything. Also, changing our reality first requires some acceptance, because if you're not engaging with your reality, you can't change it. And so it does require that you do accept at least some elements of it in order to make some changes. And in order to make big changes, radical acceptance does need to be part of it. Additionally, as we were saying, pain can't be avoided. So just like when we reject our realities, when we reject our pain, it does become suffering. And then we get stuck in this cycle of rejecting our pain, rejecting our reality, and increasing our suffering and our misery. And when we refuse to accept that, we do get stuck in this pattern of that unhappiness. And oftentimes, acceptance can lead to sadness. It can be really hard. It can be really painful. And ultimately, it can get us to that life worth living that we talk about so frequently. And something that, it's a visual that I have that I don't know if I enjoy it, but...
You carry it with you.
I carry it with me for sure. Marsha Linehan says that the path out of hell is through misery. And so by refusing to accept the misery that is part of climbing out of hell, we fall back into hell. And it was described to me, this misery, this pain, this suffering, that when we reject our reality, we get stuck in. That is this like personal hell that we've almost created if we choose to reject our reality. And so it was described to me as like to climb out of hell, to get up the stairs out of hell into a life worth living and into a reality where we can have pain and happiness. we have to go up these stairs. We have to crawl up these stairs out of hell, and those stairs are made of metal. It can be painful. It can take it can take some time. It can be sad and difficult. And if we endure that sometimes pain and that sometimes hard work of getting out of hell, there can be light at the end of the tunnel, and we can reach that life worth living. Whereas if we choose not to go through those steps and go up those steps, we just stay in that personal misery and suffering that we are choosing to engage with because we are rejecting our reality.
And so when we talk about radical acceptance, this skill, as Bree and I have been saying, is a very, very important skill to practice within ourselves. And it's also a really important skill to practice within our relationships and specifically our families, right? And so some of the things that we might have to practice acceptance in this space is that our loved ones are experiencing difficulties with their mental health or have been diagnosed with a mental illness. We might also have to accept that our loved ones are experiencing suicidal ideation and maybe don't want to be here, or are having thoughts about not being here. We might have to accept that our loved ones are engaging in maladaptive behaviors such as self-harm or significant substance use. We might have to accept that our family members or our loved ones, have done things to us in the past that have created really difficult moments and emotions in the present. There are a lot of different things that we need to practice acceptance within our families, and radical acceptance can be a really helpful skill to get there. And so, start to think about what would it be like, what would it look like if I did start to accept these really difficult things that are happening within myself and with my family. And also, I encourage you to think about what would it look like if you did not accept it. A lot of us have been in a space where we don't want to accept the reality. I do not want to accept that my loved one is thinking about suicide. I will not accept that that could be an option for them. I will not accept that my loved one has been diagnosed with a mental illness. And think about what that relationship looks like if we move forward with non-acceptance. The barriers will continue to build and build, and it will not yield for healthy relationships with ourselves or with each other. So I encourage you to start to think about what would it look like if I were to practice acceptance with these difficult moments. So the steps of radical acceptance, like a lot of skills in DBT, this is a step-by-step process because it is difficult. So the first step to radical acceptance is we want to observe that we are fighting reality. We want to recognize that we might be saying, it shouldn't be this way. Why is this happening to me? We want to observe that, and we want to recognize that, because the first step in acceptance is accepting that we might be fighting what's going on in our lives right now. The second step is to remind ourselves that the unpleasant reality is just what it is and it cannot be changed. That unpleasant reality has already happened. And as I said, things that have already happened cannot be changed because they've already happened. We also want to remind ourselves that there are causes for the reality, acknowledging that some sort of history led up to this moment. Now, in this space, we might choose to do research and say, where did this come from? Why did this happen? What happened early on? And we also just might choose to accept that something happened in the past that led up to this moment. We want to practice accepting with our whole self, right? And so there is this thing called half acceptance. And what that might look like is, yeah, that's fine. I get it, right? You told me that. I accept it. It's over, right? We're saying that, but are we really accepting it fully in our mind, our heart, and our body? That is very, very important, because just saying that we accept it does not necessarily mean that we do. We also want to practice opposite action, which is another really helpful skill. And this step 5, I think is very, very helpful. List all the behaviors that you would do if you did accept this reality and accept the facts. And then act as if you have already accepted the facts. This can be a really, really helpful step when we are practicing acceptance. What would it look like if I accepted all these things? And can I do that? We want to cope ahead with events that seem unacceptable. Imagine and rehearse in your mind what you would do if you accepted what seems unacceptable. I will say this is a very, very difficult and scary skill when we think about some of the maladaptive behaviors that might be occurring. And we want to just practice acceptance. If those things do happen, what will we do? How will we move forward with that? When we also want to make sure that we're not getting too future oriented, because again, we want to practice mindfulness of the present moment and recognizing that we want to accept what is happening currently while also acknowledging things that could happen in the future. We want to attend to body sensations as we start to think about what we need to accept. When we start to think about acceptance, our hands might get hot, right? We might feel tingling sensation throughout our body. Our face might get hot, things like that. And so we really want to attend to those physiological sensations as we start to practice acceptance. This might mean using some crisis survival skills like self-soothe, because it is really important to take care of ourselves as we walk down this road of acceptance. We want to allow disappointment, sadness, and grief to arise within us. And remember that those are emotions that are a wave that you can ride, right? We talk about riding the wave of emotions. Those emotions will come and go. And then we want to acknowledge that life can be worth living even when there is pain. And so I have some radicals to remember that I'm going to share with you guys that I think are really, really important when we talk about acceptance. And so the first radical to remember is that acceptance is the willingness to experience ourselves and our lives as they are. I remember someone asked me once, what is acceptance? And I gave them a definition that had acceptance in it. And they said, no, what actually is acceptance? I don't know what it is. And I thought that was a very, very good question. And acceptance is, this is my favorite definition, the willingness to experience ourselves and our lives just as they are. Acceptance is, it is a move away from self-deception and a move towards reality. By not practicing acceptance, we stay aloof to the intelligence of our feelings. I really love this too. When we practice acceptance, we are deliberately choosing to slow down to all the experiences that are appearing on the radar. We actually welcome harder emotions and explore them with curiosity. And so as emotional beings, we want to give ourselves some validation because we actually are built to experience even the difficult emotions. And so when we don't practice acceptance, we're not giving ourselves the credit that we deserve, that we actually can survive and accept sadness, grief, anger, guilt, shame. We actually can do that. And so by practicing acceptance, we realize, wow, emotional intelligence is a real thing and I have that. Experiencing and accepting negative emotions is the catalyst for coveted positive states, such as growing inner confidence. I love this too. And think about it. When we allow ourselves to get through these difficult emotions, accept these difficult realities, and continue to move forward, we are building and growing inner confidence that shows us, wow, I can do this. I can get through these difficult moments and continue to work towards my life worth living. When we stop struggling against certain emotions or events, we stop being defined by them too. If uncomfortable emotions or experiences are welcome to the table, such as grief or sadness, then the identification stops. Think about a time when maybe you were the sad friend, right? Or the depressed friend, right? You live with those emotions as labels. But when we accept that we experience sadness and we experience depression and we continue to choose to move forward, then we are not defined by our emotions. And lastly, acceptance is what makes change possible. We grow up believing that judging and evaluating ourselves negatively is how we improve. Many of us were taught that. And actually, the best transformation fuel is letting yourself feel what you need to feel so that you can decide what you want to do about it. This is how we develop intrapersonal intelligence. So again, radical acceptance is accepting fully our realities and choosing to move forward.